2018 год был объявлен годом бережливого производства. Бережливое производство – это философия. Некий набор инструментов современного управления. Мы поставили перед собой цель научить людей мыслить не процессами, а результатами. Давайте я объясню на простом примере, как изменение сознания одного сотрудника способно повлиять на результаты всей организации в целом. Представим Машу и Дашу, специалистов по работе с клиентами. Маша работает в обычной организации. У нее много задач, строгие должностные инструкции и большой поток клиентов. Ей не всегда получается каждому уделить время. Из-за усталости она допускает ошибки, а клиенты уходят недовольны. Вернемся к Даше. В ее организации начали внедрять принцип бережливого производства. Столкнувшись с теми же проблемами, Даша и ее коллеги создали опросный лист, выстроили пирамиду проблем и предложили способы их устранения. В коридорах повесили навигационные указатели, распределили потоки клиентов, разместили бланки заполнения документов. В организации оптимизировали документооборот. У каждого сотрудника появилась электронная подпись, а оперативные вопросы можно решить в корпоративном чате. Очереди сократились. Даша успевает хорошо выполнить свою работу благодаря порядку на столе. Все документы под рукой, посетители довольны скоростью обслуживания. Даже благодаря таким простым действиям мы видим, что организация может работать эффективнее. Высвобождается рабочее время, сокращаются издержки. Когда мы начали внедрять программу «Бережливое производство», многие отнеслись к ней скептически. Тогда мы начали действовать отдельно, точечно, с каждым конкретным руководителем, работая с ним, объясняя, рассказывая, почему это важно. Непосредственно они уже формировали рабочие группы. Включившись в процесс, они были удивлены, каких изменений можно достичь с минимальными усилиями. Сегодня мы уже видим систему, которая развивает людей, активно вовлеченных в процесс. По сути, эта система и создает новый класс сотрудников, который самостоятельно выявляет потери, формирует и поддерживает процесс непрерывных улучшений. В течение всего 2018 года в Рязанской области велась масштабная работа по процессу обучения лидеров групп и привлечению все новых компаний. В программе приняло участие 75 организаций. От детских садиков и поликлиник до промышленных гигантов и администрации губернатора. Обучено 1391 человек. Внедрили полученные знания в работу 4400 специалистов. Особенно ощутимые цифры на промышленных предприятиях и в правительстве Рязанской области. Проведено 325 мероприятий для успешной адаптации программы и контроля результатов. Единый принцип бережливого производства дал импульс к оптимизации большого количества процессов. Удалось настроить распределение посетителей, добавились элементы навигации, упрощены действия по подаче документов и записи на получение услуги. На примере здравоохранения в поликлинике номер 7 здоровые и больные дети не пересекаются. Введен единый талон для медосмотра. Вопросы оперативно можно решить через колл-центр. Подобные изменения происходят еще в 25 поликлиниках. В кадастровой палате разработан новый сайт, в котором функционирует интернет-приемная. Подать документы можно в электронном виде без посещения ведомства. Многофункциональный центр разделил потоки клиентов на тех, кто подает документы, и тех, кто получает. В итоге время получения документов сократится до 4 раз. Правительству Рязанской области удалось частично отказаться от бумаг. Идет процесс внедрения электронного документооборота. Формат некоторых совещаний изменился. Сейчас они проходят удаленно. Это особенно актуально для участников из районных центров. Благодаря совместным действиям Министерства имущества и Центра закупок Рязанской области удалось сэкономить для бюджета 4 миллиона рублей. Во всех учреждениях отдельное значение уделяется вопросам ресурсосбережения. Полученный опыт показал эффективность бережливого производства в разных отраслях. И нам предстоит еще масштабная работа в этом направлении. Уверена, что форум «Бережливое производство» станет для нас не только возможностью обмена опытом, но и будет мощным импульсом для дальнейшего развития программы в регионе. Всероссийский форум «Бережливое производство» объединил сегодня более 2000 участников из многих регионов России, чтобы вместе достигнуть большего.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Губернатор Рязанской области Николай Любимов. Уважаемые участники форума, дорогие друзья,
Я рад приветствовать заинтересованную аудиторию из 27 регионов России. У нас в гостях руководители, бизнесмены, сотрудники государственного сектора. Сегодня в Рязани собрались те, кто понимает актуальность и важность внедрения принципов бережливого производства. Глава государства ставит перед нами задачу социально-экономического прорыва России. Все мы понимаем, что осуществить его может только эффективный государственный аппарат и сильная экономика. Этого возможно достичь с помощью проектного, бережливого управления, добиваясь изменений, в центре которых человек. Главный принцип предлагаемой концепции – эффективность во всем. В руководстве, в управлении персоналом, в организации рабочих процессов, времени, пространства. Я считаю, что в нашей области созданы все благоприятные условия для этого. 2018 год мы объявили годом бережливого производства. Был дан старт для перехода на качественно новый этап развития системы управления, основанной на принципах бережливости. За это время нам уже удалось успешно реализовать более 100 проектов в аппарате правительства, органах исполнительной власти, в подведомственных учреждениях. Активная работа ведется в социальной сфере, здравоохранении, в государственном секторе, а также на промышленных предприятиях Рязанской области. Бережливый регион для нас не килограммы, рубли и прочие показатели. Это прежде всего люди, которые в итоге будут жить лучше, без напряжения, общаясь с властью, соцзащитой, медициной. Еще совсем недавно мы вступили в проект «Бережливая поликлиника». Его реализует Министерство здравоохранения Российской Федерации и госкорпорация «Росатом». В результате нам на практике удалось повысить качество оказания медицинской помощи. Новаторами в этой сфере стали наши городские поликлиники, 7-я детская и поликлиника номер 6. Вслед за ними принципы бережливого производства внедрили областная клиническая больница и больница имени Семашко. Последней, к примеру, удалось в 6 раз сократить время ожидания в регистратуре. Активно внедрять методы бережливого производства начали наши региональные министерства. Удалось значительно сократить сроки документооборота. Так, в одном министерстве это время уменьшилось с 35 дней до 8. В другом ведомстве на подписание документа раньше уходило 7 часов, сейчас 2 минуты. Экономическая выгода от такой оптимизации около 4 миллионов рублей. В этом же направлении совершенствуется работа аппарата правительства области. Сроки согласования документов уменьшились в 4 раза. Ведутся также проекты по сокращению расходов на коммунальное обслуживание, по сокращению потерь при потреблении электроэнергии. Оптимизация затрат на служебный автотранспорт правительства области позволила сократить расходы на 20%, а это около 2 миллионов бюджетных средств. Хотел бы подчеркнуть вовлеченность участников проекта социальной сферы. Это детские сады номер 10 в Рыбном и 30 в Рязани, строительный колледж. На ряде промышленных предприятий инструменты бережливого производства используются уже давно и успешно. Отмечу такие заводы, как САС-комплект, Рязанский шпалопропиточный завод, завод «Русская кожа», где сегодня проходила секция «Промышленность». Недавно эксперты Федерального центра компетенции совместно со специалистами нашего региона приступили к работе еще на 2 крупных предприятиях. Это Рязанский завод автофургонов и компания «Точинвест». В ближайшее время мы планируем вовлечь в этот процесс еще 103 предприятия Рязанской области. Задача, которую перед нами поставил президент Владимир Владимирович Путин, достаточно амбициозна. Это обеспечение к 2024 году роста производительности труда на предприятиях несырьевого сектора не меньше 5% в год. Наш регион приложит все усилия для достижения этой цели. Мы строим новую модель управления. Модель открытого диалога, где работа каждого человека воспринимается как важный вклад в одно общее дело. В наших планах вовлечь в проект «Бережливое правительство» все органы исполнительной власти, муниципальное образование и подведомственные учреждения. Кому-то может показаться, что лин-технологии доступны и необходимы только для топ-менеджеров и производственников. Поверьте, это не так. Принципы бережливого производства можно применять и в обычной жизни. Попробуйте, и результат не заставит себя ждать. Я хочу еще раз подчеркнуть, бережливое производство – это не просто набор инструментов. Это образ мышления, стремление к постоянному развитию и совершенствованию, в центре которого находится человек. Профессионалом нельзя родиться, но им можно стать. Особенно важно, когда в органах власти работают люди готовые и желающие развиваться. В Рязанской области в рамках проекта «Современное государственное управление» формируется новая система отбора кадров. Она позволит найти таких людей и обеспечить им профессиональный рост. Совместно с президентской академией мы провели ряд мероприятий для 40 тысяч государственных служащих и работников бюджетной сферы. Многие из них попали в базу перспективных кадров региона. Теперь мы объявляем о новом этапе – о формировании открытого конкурса в единый резерв управленческих кадров. У каждого из вас, независимо от сферы деятельности, есть возможность войти в состав действующей команды правительства и повлиять на улучшение качества жизни рязанцев. Призываю всех активных и неравнодушных людей зарегистрироваться на портале «Управленческие кадры Рязанской области» кадры62.рф. А те, кто уже зарегистрировался и прошел анкетирование, мы приглашаем к следующим этапам. Только все вместе, только единой командой мы сможем сделать жизнь на Рязанской земле для людей лучше. Now, let me welcome our dear guest, Dr. Jeffri Laiker. His career has been dedicated to lean and continuous improvement. The president of Laiker Lean Advisors and the author of the international bestsellers, The Toyota Way, 14 Management Principles from the World's Greatest Manufacturer. Also many other books, such as Lean Leadership, Culture, Heart and the Soul of the Toyota Way. We are very honored Dr. Jefri Laiker shares with us his many years of experience in lean research. Hope you enjoy here the opportunity to be a part of this event. Please welcome Dr. Jefri Laiker. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, all the way up there. And this is different than my usual class at the University of Michigan. It's usually not hundreds of people. I'm going to be talking today about lean leadership. And as my background is somewhat unusual in that I started as an industrial engineer, and then I got a PhD in sociology, and then I went to an industrial engineering program at University of Michigan to teach, and that was 35 years ago. And at that time, I became part of a study to understand the differences between Japanese companies in auto and American companies in auto. And as I studied the Japanese companies and visited Japan and did interviews, I realized that Toyota was better than the other Japanese auto companies. They were all similar in some ways, very passionate about quality, very good at continuous improvement, but Toyota was a little bit different, a little bit better. And I then developed a deeper relationship with Toyota, which led to my writing books about Toyota. It was a great honor for me when Toyota agreed to my writing The Toyota Way, because Toyota is very protective of the Toyota production system and the Toyota Way, and generally believes that outsiders can't understand it. And I had to work hard to learn the Toyota production system and study it and convince them that I understood it enough to be able to write about it in an authentic and accurate way. But eventually they agreed with that, and then they really liked the book, The Toyota Way, when it came out. And then at the same time, I started a consulting company to work with companies and other organizations in service and manufacturing, and work with them to implement what I learned from Toyota. And by doing that, I was learning about introducing these ideas coming from a Japanese company to other companies outside Toyota. And as I did that, it became very clear that in a large company, maybe, for example, in manufacturing that has many manufacturing plants around the world, or it could be, we work with Hertz rental car company, and they have places all around the world and different departments. And what we'd see is that there would be a few beacons of success that stood out. It could be in a manufacturing plant, and maybe out of 40 manufacturing plants, 2 stood out. Or in Hertz rental car company, it could be a site at an airport, and maybe out of 150, 10 stood out. And the ones that stood out always had a certain type of leader, and that leader had certain characteristics that were like characteristics of Toyota leaders. So it made me realize that the real key to Lean is not the tools and methods, but it's the leadership, and leadership has to have a certain type of characteristics and also a certain philosophy. So that led to going back to Toyota, and it turned out that one person who I had met very early, his name is Gary Condis, and Gary Condis was the head of a Toyota plant, and then he got promoted eventually to become the head of manufacturing for North America. And he worked for Toyota for over 20 years. And he had a very good understanding, very deep understanding of the Toyota production system. So we agreed to work together to collaborate to write this book about lean leadership. So I'll be talking mostly about that. And I can't see. Okay. Over here is the English version. Sorry, I have to cheat and look at my notes. So I'll be talking about what I mean by lean leadership. What are these characteristics of leaders that made them successful with lean while other leaders were not so successful? And how do these people get developed within Toyota, and what does that mean for other companies outside Toyota? And how can you, everybody in this room, I'm sure in some way or another is a leader of maybe a small number of people or a very large number of people, and how can you develop your skills as a lead leader? First of all, why Toyota? And one answer is because they're successful. One measure of success is their profitability, and the measure used for profitability is called EBITDA, and it basically means earnings before you take away money for things like taxes. And by that standard, as a percent of their sales, they're the most profitable auto company in the world. You can see other auto companies that are profitable, like Jaguar and Daimler and BMW, are luxury car makers. So their profit margins are naturally very high because they only make a certain segment, whereas Toyota makes passenger cars and trucks and vehicles for the masses, as well as the Lexus brand. So with this range of vehicles and range of prices, Toyota is still more profitable than any other automaker. That's been true consistently. There might be a given year in the last 35 years where Toyota might not be number one, but in most years they're number one. If you look at quality measures, in most years they're number one. Maybe they slip to number 2 or 3. But their consistency of quality, their consistency of earnings, their consistency of growing their sales has really stood out compared to other automakers. And one thing I'd like to ask is to get some water. Why Toyota? Why this one company? And there are other, obviously, Japanese automakers who came from the Japanese culture and are also very focused on quality. And the Japanese word kaizen means continuous improvement, and kaizen is kind of a religion in Japan. It's not unique to Toyota. So the idea that you want to continually get better and better and better and better is kind of baked into the Japanese culture. So what was different about Toyota? And I think the difference was really their founders who created the culture for Toyota. Excuse me. And the starting point was Sakichi Toyota, who became the greatest inventor in the history of Japan. I'm sure that, I don't know who it is, but I'm sure that there's some great inventors and maybe one great inventor from Russia that stands out. So that would be this person in Japan, Sakichi Toyota. And his lifelong pursuit was to create a fully automatic loom to make cloth. And at that time, when he started, all the looms were wood, and you worked by hand, and it was mostly women working at night to make some extra money for the family or to make clothes for the family. And his goal was to make it easier for these women who he said were working their fingers to the bone. So he started to develop, at that time the looms were made of wood, and he decided his father was a carpenter, and he had learned carpentry to work with wood. And he decided to make a wood loom that was more automated. And he only could use gravity. He didn't have any power at the time. So what he did was he made, one of the things you have to do in loom is you take a shuttle that has thread on it and you run it back and forth with your hands. And he made a chute out of wood. And by tipping the chute using gravity, the shuttle would go back and forth automatically. And then you could use your feet and pedals to move the shuttles of thread back and forth, and it would go back and forth with no human intervention. It was basically fully automatic, but again, using wood and gravity. And then he continued to make invention after invention after invention. Again, when in Japan they would call kaizen. So kaizen literally means improvement for the better. So he was doing kaizen and kaizen and kaizen for about 40 years. And by the end of the 40 years, he had developed the world's first fully automatic loom. His son, Kichiro Toyota, eventually worked with him in that business and helped create these the power looms. And then he said to his son, Kichiro Toyota, I have done something important for society by making new kinds of looms. Now it's your turn, Kichiro. I want you to do something great for society. And Kichiro Toyota started Toyota Motor Company. And Kichiro Toyota had studied loom making in factories, and in fact spent 2 years in England studying the biggest manufacturer of looms called the Platt Brothers. And when he observed their operation, he noticed people were doing more walking around than they were working to make looms. There was a lot of waste. And he diagrammed this and saw that, for example, if they needed to change a tool on the loom, they would walk across the factory, they'd search around for the tools and parts, they'd then walk back, and they might waste a half an hour searching for stuff. So he decided when he started his manufacturing company for automobiles that he wanted to eliminate waste. And he said in a very early speech, I'm going to eliminate slack, waste from all my processes using the principle of just in time. Now this is back in the 1940s, before textbooks were written about just in time and before we knew about lean. And where did he get this idea? And again, he got it from his experience in this factory, and then coming up with this idea, and he had this vision for how his factory needed to run. His factory was brand new. They didn't know how to make a car. They didn't understand the manufacturing processes for making a car, and they didn't have much money. So he had to be very frugal about everything he put into his factory. He had to have no waste. So this was the starting point of this idea of just-in-time. But it was just a theory. It was just an idea. So then Kiichiro Toyota asked Taiichi Ohno, the other key leader, to make just-in-time a reality. In fact, they had benchmarked Ford Motor Company, and they were making Model Ts and Model As. They're making one kind of car for the masses, perhaps 1 million cars a year. And Toyota was just starting from nothing, and they were going to only be able to make and sell a few thousand cars. But Ford, because of the volume, was about 10 times as productive. So Kiichiro Toyota asked Taiichi Ohno to find a way to eliminate waste and achieve the same productivity as Ford with only a few thousand vehicles instead of 1 million vehicles. So Ohno had to really think hard and find a philosophy and a different approach to manufacturing in order to compete with the big giant Ford. And what he ended up developing is the Toyota production system. But he didn't do it theoretically. He didn't write a model and list out the characteristics of a lean organization and then teach tools to the factory. He was on the shop floor every day working with the workers, and they were experimenting, they were trying things. And through a lot of experimentation and a vision of just-in-time, they achieved a different way of manufacturing. So, for example, at Ford, they would have a shop. He was working in a machining shop to make parts for engines. And in the Ford engine plant, there would be a department that was cutting the steel, and there was another department that was drilling holes in the steel. And there was big equipment for cutting, and there's big equipment for drilling. And then there's a department that did assembly, and there were a bunch of people on an assembly line. But between the processes was lots and lots of inventory. So if you were in the cutting department, you're just cutting metal, putting it into inventory, and you don't care what happens after that. So Ohno's idea was, what if we could put one cutting machine next to one drilling machine and then immediately assemble? And that was called a one-piece flow cell. And when he did that, his productivity was actually higher than Ford's with very low volumes. So that led to a whole different way of thinking, a whole paradigm change about manufacturing. So Ohno continued to do that and continued to invent, add on new tools, new methods, new layers, until after about 10 years, they had developed the Toyota production system. That was done by the 1950s. Then over the next 10 years, they taught this to their suppliers and did projects, their supplier plans. Now, one thing about Ohno is that he was not a very patient man. And in the Japanese culture, in certain cases, when you're the master and you view other people as your apprentices, you could be very brutal, yelling at them, hitting them, throwing things at them. And he was like that. He would just get mad because you don't understand, you're not thinking, you have concrete between your ears, and he would call you names and yell at you. But then people responded, and they would really think, and they'd really try, and they'd try to make this work in their department. And then he would tell them, okay, you're doing okay, and then he'd give them the next challenge, and the next challenge, and the next challenge. But his approach was always only on the shop floor. So there's a lean term that you might have heard called the gemba. And the gemba is a Japanese word which means the place. And the place is where the places where the work is being done. So Ono's view is that the only place you can possibly learn anything worthwhile is at the Gemba, by being on the shop floor. And the Toyota production system is alive at the Gemba. And if you take the Toyota production system, like I'm doing, into a classroom or on stage, you're killing it. It's kind of meaningless. So all of the teaching of Toyota became doing actual work to transform operations, to make them better. And then you learn by doing, which is also kind of ingrained in the Japanese culture, the idea of the master-apprentice relationship, who's teaching you and you're learning by doing. So I show this slide, on the slide, this circle on the floor, this yellow circle, and that was called the Ono circle. And in the Ono circle, he would tell you to stand there and just observe, and then tell Ono what you saw. And he would keep on asking you, look some more, until you saw it deeper and deeper and really understood the process. Normally that would take an entire day, standing in a circle. So, how do we get the term lean? And some of you may know this, some of you may not, but there was a book written called The Machine That Changed the World. While I was at Michigan and we were working on studies in Japanese auto companies, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology in Boston was doing the same thing. And two of the people who were part of that study, Jim Womack and Dan Jones, saw all this research being done by professors and their students and said, this is great stuff, but nobody's going to read it. Because it's dry, it sounds like research papers, not like the way real people talk. So they decided to write a popular book, and they called it The Machine That Changed the World. And the idea of that was the machine that changed the world was the automobile, but it was also the Toyota production system. And they needed to come up with a name for the Toyota production system, and they came up with the word lean. And it was actually a graduate student who suggested it. This particular graduate student was a long-distance runner, and he spent some time working in a Toyota plant in the United States. And he said, when I think about what Toyota's doing, what they're doing is more with less. So they're getting more production with less people. They're getting more production with less inventory, with less space. They have less rework because they build in quality the first time. And when I think about more with less, I think about a lean person, like an athlete, who can do more with their body with less effort, with less energy. So Jim Womack liked that idea, and they called it lean. And they said that this is a new paradigm beyond mass production. And if you didn't learn this paradigm, you're going to go out of business. That wasn't actually true, but he was certainly right that it became the kind of dominant paradigm in manufacturing, and then started to spread to other areas like lean government and lean healthcare and lean fill in the blank, and whatever you want to put in there, there's lean for it. Then they came out with the book Lean Thinking, and this was using examples from companies outside Toyota that had transformed to lean. Some of the more successful companies who had a Japanese teacher, and what the Japanese teachers were teaching was not simply a methodology or tools, but rather they were teaching a way of thinking and a mindset. So they said lean is not just a manufacturing method, it's a way of thinking. I came along because I was reading these books and I was very interested in studying Japanese management, and I was doing some consulting and trying to figure out how you taught people lean thinking and what lean thinking really was. So since this came from Toyota and I had access to Toyota, I decided, why don't I study what this really means in Toyota, the original, not the copy. And as you know, a copy of something is often not as good as the original. So I went back to Toyota and asked them if I could do more research and visit the plants and interview people, and they agreed and kind of opened the doors. And I spent a lot of time trying to understand what does this really mean in Toyota. And I wrote this as a set of management principles for the whole enterprise. So that led to the Toyota Way in 2003. Now that book was saying, here's the principles, and if you want to learn from Toyota, you need to think about all these principles, and it all together makes up a system. So I called the principles of philosophy, and said that you're really not going to make this kind of investment in developing the system, the people, get people to use the tools effectively, if you're only thinking short term, if you want quick results. This only makes sense if you're thinking long term. So the philosophy had to be a long-term investment in making the enterprise great. And then there are a set of processes. There's a set of processes, lean processes, that we think about as lean. So we have one piece flow without interruption. We have quality processes, and we have visual management to be able to see the state of the process by looking, is this in control or out of control? So those are the tools. And then we have the next layer, we have people who are learning and being developed to continuously improve those processes. And the main tool that the people are using is their brains, but their brains have to be trained to use a kind of a rigorous problem-solving process. I don't know what that is. It might be the speaker where I spilled water. I'm not sure. Could somebody come up here and look at the speaker? We're trying to figure out why this sounds like it's going to explode. Okay, so meanwhile, I was at the University of Michigan, a professor. I had a lot of PhD students, and my PhD students were doing research on particular aspects of lean. And one of my students was a master's student. His name was Mike Rother, and he was different than the others. He was different because he listened to me and he went to class, but whenever we talked about something, he wanted to try it. So he would go to a company in the area and he would try to implement it. And then he'd come back and tell me, Dr. Laiker, what you told us kind of doesn't work, because I just had this experience in this plant. And he'd always be pushing back on me. He ended up writing a book more recently called Toyota Kata. The word kata, in this stage, apparently this place is for fights, for boxing, and for karate. And in karate, there's a concept called kata. And kata is if you're boxing, if you're doing karate, you learn from your master different routines. I need somebody to come up here and turn off the speaker, unplug the speaker, or move it. So I think I spilled water. I maybe need to unplug that. Sorry. Okay, so the kata for martial arts are movements. You move your body, and this is the way to do it. You do it this way. Keep on doing it over and over again until it becomes natural. Then I teach you another kata and another kata. And the master says, do it this way. And you do it this way. And you do it enough times until the master says, stop, you've mastered this kata. And he started thinking about this idea of lean thinking, and he realized that if we want to change a person's thinking, it's even more difficult than teaching a skill like karate. And if you have to practice how do you move your body to do karate moves, you certainly have to practice how to change your mindset. So if we want to change people's mindset, we need kata, we need something to practice. So I'll talk more about that. This is a quote from Hajime Oba, and Mr. Oba was one of the students of Ono, and he was he was the same serious person like Ono, who believed you learn by doing, you learn at the Gemba. But he said, really what we're trying to teach when we teach the Toyota production system is the scientific way of thinking. And that was the lean thinking mindset. It was a scientific way of thinking where you're looking at the reality and facts. And then you're, based on facts, you're trying things, you're testing ideas, and collecting data, moving toward a goal, moving toward a target. And the way we teach that to people is through an actual project, starting small, and then learning from experience through trial and error. And so he says, how do I respond to this problem? I think it's going to blow up before I finish my talk. Okay, so then out of that, I met with Mike Rother and we came up with this definition of lean. I think it's that one. And the definition is the scientific struggle to better flow value to each customer. So the idea of flow is very important, that we're trying to flow work, we're trying to flow value, we're trying to flow a service. The original model was one by one, line up the machines and make one unit at a time, like an assembly line. It's just flowing through the assembly line. And we want to flow value without waste, without interruption, without delay. So if it's a physical product, the physical product should move through the machines without having to be put down into a bin and taken out of the bin and brought to the next machine. It should ideally flow one by one. If it's, say, a patient coming into a hospital, you want the patients to flow one by one through the hospital without sitting in waiting rooms and going to a doctor's room and sitting and getting the weight taken and then waiting for the doctor to come. If it's a repair facility for your car, you should have customers coming in, getting their car fixed and leaving, and not spending a lot of time waiting. So the focus is on the flow of value without waste. But the way you achieve that is through a struggle. You have a vision of what you want to achieve, and then you don't know how to do it. So you struggle by trying things and by being very passionate and dedicated to achieving the goal. Yeah. Oh, is the problem this? So this became probably wasn't my water that spilled, it was this device. This became the way of doing scientific thinking within Toyota referred to as PDCA. And still today, go any place in the world in Toyota, any department, and ask, what is the method by which you approve and achieve your goals? And they will say PDCA. And PDCA means Plan, Do, Check, Act. It was sometimes called Plan, Do, Study Act. And that led to many companies who were trying to learn from Toyota Lean having some sort of problem-solving process based on PDCA. But the typical understanding of PDCA outside Toyota was that we have to define the problem in the P stage, in the plan stage, and develop solutions and develop a plan for implementation of the solutions. Then we need to implement the solutions. Then we need to check whether the solutions did what we thought they were going to do. And then we need to take further action to standardize the solutions so that they become sustainable. So that was the traditional definition, but it was not the definition within Toyota. The definition within Toyota was, again, a scientific way of thinking. So their idea of PDCA was that your plan is just a prediction about what you think might happen if I try this idea. The idea is not a solution, but it's something that you think might get you closer to the goal. But you won't know whether it works or not until you try it. When you try it and you take action, you're not implementing a solution, you're testing your assumption by running an experiment, like a scientist. And the reason you run an experiment is because you don't know what's going to happen. You don't believe that you already know. You believe there's something to learn. When you run the experiment, then you have to check the results. What actually happened when I introduced this change? And then based on what happened, you ask yourself, what did I learn from this? What do I know now that I didn't know before I ran the experiment? And what should I try next? Now the goal, if it's a big goal and a difficult goal, then you don't know how to achieve the goal. But just like Sakichi Toyota, who developed the loom, you start someplace, you try something. And then you learn from that, and then you try something else, then you learn from that. Now in his case, his goal was to create a fully automated loom, and it took him about 40 years of doing it, to do it. And for 40 years, that was all he focused on in his whole life. And he ran thousands of experiments to achieve that. So that founder influenced the way of thinking at Toyota, that to achieve any difficult goal, like to become as productive as Ford, when Ford was making 1 million vehicles and we're only making a few thousand, we have to experiment and learn. And the Toyota production system was created by experimenting and learning over 10 years. So Toyota had learned that, and it became part of this culture, this idea of learning by experimenting, having a very clear goal that nobody's ever achieved before. But there's a problem. And the problem is that people naturally desire to get from the problem to the solution as quickly as possible. We don't have patience to wait 10 years or 30 years or even a month. We want to know this is going to work before we introduce this method. And that leads to implementing superficially solutions that may not actually work for you. And many companies copy Toyota. They copied Toyota solutions. They went into a factory that assembled cars and they tried to copy what they saw. But the assembly process at Toyota is different than other kinds of processes. For example, at Toyota, they also stamp out steel bodies and that's very big machines and it's equipment doing the work, and that's different than people by hand assembling a car. So they have different solutions in the stamping department compared to in the assembly department, but they normally don't show you the stamping department. You normally see the assembly department because that's what people are most interested in. So this is the problem. So when I say people naturally desire to quickly get to the solution, I'm not saying people are stupid or people are lazy or people don't think well. I'm saying it's actually built into our brain structure that our brain wants us to find a solution quickly and gets impatient when we have to struggle with something we don't understand. Struggle with uncertainty. I'll get back to that. So here's an example. What do you see here? And think about the first thing that comes to your mind. And for most people, what they see are probably it's a woman and she has wet legs. Maybe she just took a shower, or maybe she's going to a spa and she has oil on her legs. How many people see the wet legs? Raise your hand. And I saw it. I see the wet legs. Okay, so what is this actual drawing? What it actually is a woman's legs, but with white paint on it. Now, how many people can now see the white paint on the legs? Why is it that when we first look, we see shiny legs? And the reason is because our brains automatically fill in the blank. We have an image in our head. We have a model in our mind of what wet legs look like. We see it, we categorize it, and that's what it is. So if you're right, then it's good that you have this mechanism. We also use this mechanism for other things. Well, let me back up. So, for example, how many of you this morning before you left washed up, took a shower, brushed your teeth? How many of you had to prepare in the bathroom before you came? How many of you thought about it and wrote out a procedure for how you're going to use the bathroom? There's some laughter. And my guess is that the way you use the bathroom, the way you brush your teeth, whatever you do, the way you wash your hands, is probably pretty much the same as the way you did it yesterday. And that's because we have habits. We have a hand-washing habit. And the benefit of having that habit is we don't have to spend a lot of time thinking about it. It would be impossible to drive a car if we had to think about every single thing we do. We have to try to remind ourselves where the steering wheel is. If we had to remind ourselves that we use our right foot to push on the gas pedal. So we develop habits, and we're basically calling, in computer terms, we're calling a subroutine, a computer subroutine. And it's the press your foot on the gas pedal subroutine. And it just happens automatically. And we get so good at it that we might be driving for a while and realize we don't even remember what we saw when we were driving. We're almost on automatic pilot. So our brains like that. And the brain, if you think about the brain as having two parts, it's a lot more complicated than this, but if you think about the brain as having a part that is rote memory and houses all these routines in your memory, and then the part that's thinking and talking and reasoning, most of what you do comes from the part of the brain that's not thinking, that's not reasoning, that's just automatic, on automatic pilot. And that allows us to be productive and get through the day. The problem is that some of these routines we develop that become habits are bad habits. So anybody who's tried to stop smoking and thinks that's a bad habit, anybody who's tried to lose weight because you're not eating right and you're not exercising knows changing a habit is very difficult. So I'm going to give you exercise to demonstrate the difficulty of changing a habit. And what I want you to do is to take a piece of paper. I see a lot of you have pads. Take a piece of paper and a pencil, and I'm going to say go, and I'm going to time you on my watch. 1 second. So I'm going to time you, and I'm going to ask you to simply write your name, sign your name the way you normally sign it, the way your routine, your habit for signing your name works. And then I'm going to ask you to raise your hand when you write your name 5 times. So as fast as you can. Okay, fast as you can. Start now. Write your name 5 times. And raise your hand when you're done. Okay, so it's only been 6 seconds. Now it's 8 seconds. Now it's 10 seconds. Now it's 12 seconds. So lots of hands have gone up in 6 to 12 seconds. So that's good. And one of the things you learn about lean is to give positive reinforcement. So I congratulate you on being very good at writing your names. I'm going to just change now the task in a very, very small way and ask you to do the same task, but I'm going to make a very small change, not as difficult as changing your mindset to lean. All I want you to do is use your other hand and write your name 5 times, sign your name 5 times with your other hand. And again, I'll time you. So ready, set, go. It's been 10 seconds. Okay, I see a few hands going up. Now it's 15 seconds. And 20 seconds. Okay, so you can stop now. So, how many of you felt comfortable writing with your other hand? How many people felt it was natural, comfortable, easy? How many of you felt your quality was the same when they wrote with the right and left hand? And if the answer is the quality was the same, then you happen to be one of the rare individuals who can use either hand. But most of us can't. I can't. So what happened? Why did the second time feel so weird, odd, compared to the first? And normally when I ask people, they say it felt, with the other hand, it felt awkward, slow, unnatural, stiff, difficult. And what's happening? Why does it feel that way? And the reason is that basically our thinking patterns, you can think about our thinking patterns as being in a loop. So when we do something, when we decide to do something, like write our name, sign our name with our normal dominant hand, what you're telling you, the part of your brain that you don't control, the hidden part of your brain that you don't control, is this is the way I'm doing it. And that gets imprinted in your brain as a set of pathways between you connecting your neurons. The brain is basically a trillion neurons that fire. And when they fire in a certain pattern, they're keeping a record, like saving data to a hard disk on your computer. And every time you do something the same way, that record becomes stronger and stronger and more dominant. So every time you think or do something, you are more likely to do it again in the same way. And in this picture we show a road, like a highway. So if you think about a forest and there's no path, and you have to cut a path through the forest, if you were to walk every day through this forest on a certain path, eventually the grass and vegetation would start to die out, and you would see that there was a path, and it was easier to walk through the forest on this path, as long as you stayed on the path. And then if that path was used by enough people, you might decide to pave it and make it into a road. And when you have a road, it's easier to go over fast than a path. And the path is easier than just a bunch of trees in the wilderness. So essentially, by writing your name a certain way for years and years and years, you created like a super highway. And without thinking, you could do it. I signed a bunch of books before I came out here, and I wasn't even thinking about it. I have a standard signature that I use. Then when I ask you to use your other hand, you're back in the wilderness. You don't have a path, and that's going to take more effort. So our brains are smart, and they realize that this is hard and this is easy. It's easy to write with this hand, it's hard to write with the other hand. So please write with the dominant hand. And when you don't write with the dominant hand, the brain is saying, stop it, you're messing up, you're taking too much energy, and it causes pain. And the pain, and you can see it on the computer scans. The pain centers actually light up when you're using the wrong hand, because you don't have a good habit for that, because you're using a lot of energy. And actually, it goes back historically to prehistoric times, when wasting energy could mean the difference between life and death. There's an animal, and we react and kill the animal, or we get killed. And messing around and thinking about alternatives is a death sentence. So the dominant hand gives you a fast and efficient way with very little energy, and writing with your other hand gives you slow and inefficient neural pathways. It takes thinking and reasoning and a lot of energy. It turns out that when you're using your brain to learn something new, your brain uses about 20% of your total body energy. How do you deal with that? How is it that you develop this new lean mindset, which actually is counter to the natural way we think? If our brain wants us to make quick decisions because it uses less energy, and then we decide I should really be making slower, more thoughtful decisions based on collecting data, based on facts, you're doing something unnatural, and your brain is going to punish you. That is, it's going to be painful. And maybe you'll do it in a training session on problem solving for the day of the training session. Then you'll go back and you'll go back to your dominant hand. You'll go back to the way you solve problems, which is more by intuition and quickly as possible. So what Mike Rother said is, what we really need is something to practice, kata, to train your brain to think scientifically, to think in terms of PDCA. And the kata for Taichi Ono was basically him yelling and screaming. And he would challenge your thinking. And one of the famous stories was one of his students, and they had a quality problem in assembly, and the student is in assembly, and he's trying to fix the problem, and Ono says, "Why are you here in assembly? Is this the root cause? Is this where the problem got created?" And the student looks at the process and realizes that the parts don't fit together because they weren't machined right in the machining department, which is in another side of the plant. So his students just starts running to go to the machine shop to try to understand the problem in the machine shop. And Ono grabs him by the shoulder and pulls him back. And he says, "Wait a second. You're going to allow these assemblers to make bad parts while you run off to the machine shop?" And his student's like, "What do you want? You were mad because I was in assembly and I went to solve the problem, and now you're mad because I'm leaving the area. What do you want?" And then Ono said, "Contain the problem first, then find the root cause." So this became a very big lesson, life lesson for the student. It's very emotional because he cared a lot about what Taichi Ono thought about it. But he realizes that when you have a problem, you have to first contain the problem, but understand I haven't really solved the problem. I've just contained it in assembly so that we aren't sending bad product to the customer. But then you have to go and find the root cause and solve the real problem. Again, this is one lesson and one kata, say for all. But Oda was doing these things by his gut reaction and his kind of genius. So what my brother says is, for the rest of us who are not a genius like Teiichi Ono, is there a method we can use that's more systematic and structured? So he called this Toyota Kata, but it really has nothing to do with Toyota. Toyota doesn't use this method at all. This was for people outside Toyota who need to practice this scientific way of thinking. Okay, so let me go back to Toyota. And before I wrote the Toyota Way, Toyota had developed in 2001, my book was in 2003. In 2001, they introduced the Toyota Way 2001, which was the first time in history that they had documented, written down what the Toyota Way was. Big deal for Toyota. And they concluded that there's only two things that matter for the entire company, no matter what part of the company you're in. It could be in sales, it could be in the dealerships that sell the cars, it could be in the accounting department, it could be in the factory. Wherever you were, the two things that mattered were continuous improvement and respect for people. And continuous improvement was Kaizen. It was plan, do, check, act. It was the systematic, scientific way of improving toward a challenging objective. Cut the time it takes to do this in half. That's the challenge. And then you do Kaizen and Kaizen and Kaizen to cut the time in half. And it takes a lot of thinking, and it's also not natural. It takes slower, more patient thinking, and our brain is yelling at us, saying, stop all this thinking, stop all this effort, stop using all this energy. And then they said, if I'm going to ask you not only to do your job, but also to think about how to improve how you do your job, you better feel like you are getting something in return. And what you're getting in return is respect. And for Toyota, respect means you are part of this organization. You're part of this collective that we call Toyota, and we value you as a team member. There's no employees of Toyota, they're team members, and they're very serious about that. And part of being a team member is you don't get kicked off the team because we happen to have a bad month in sales. So they don't lay off anybody. Essentially, you end up with a job for life within Toyota. They won't promise that because business might be so bad they have to lay off people. But unless there's a threatening crisis that threatens to shut down the company, they don't lay off people. And then there's a foundation of 5 core values. And the first value is everybody should be willing to accept a big challenge to do something that they never did before. We do it this way now, and it takes 6 people. Our challenge is to do the same amount of work with 4 people. We for stamping, you make a die, like a cookie cutter, that stamps out the parts. And to design this die for production, right now it takes us 6 months, and we have a challenge to do the same amount of work in 1 month. That could be another kind of challenge. And when you get that challenge, you have to think, this is really important, and my reputation is on the line, and I'm responsible for achieving the challenge. So it has to become your commitment that you believe in, that you want to achieve. Just like Sakichi Toyota wanted to achieve a fully automatic loom. So they need to develop people that are willing to take on a challenge and be accountable and be responsible. And then they need people to learn Kaizen, to learn this systematic scientific PDCA process and practice it so that they can achieve bigger and bigger challenges as they grow up in the organization. And Ono said that in order to understand the process deeply enough to figure out what you should change in the process to meet your challenge, you need to go and see, you need to stand in a circle, you need to observe deeply, and you need to develop that value in people, that you don't sit there in front of your computer, you go to the process, you observe it, you talk to the people, you watch the machine. And they also want to teach that you don't need to do it alone. There are other people who have different points of view, and they'll see things you don't see. And collectively, you get a much better picture of reality and also generate more ideas for possible solutions. And therefore, teamwork is critical, so they need people who are willing to work as part of a team. And also to give credit to the team and not try to just take credit for themselves, not be egotistical. And finally, they need people to feel like they're respected, and every leader needs to make their team feel respected and like everybody counts. Every individual matters, and you're all part of our team, and we're trying to invest in you so you're better for the company and better for your family. So these are the core values. So if you do these things, you have developed a lean leader. Now, I already said that this is not natural. It's very natural for a leader to want to make, when they see a crisis, when you see a problem, it's very natural to want to jump in and solve the problem. Even if you're up here and 3 or 4 levels down is the problem, you see the problem, who's working on this problem? What ideas do you have? When are you going to get it solved? And that's the opposite of what you should be doing as a lean leader. You should track and see who's working on it. You should ask them how they're working on it. And if they have a good process, a good method, you should let them work on it. It's their responsibility, not yours. So you become more of a coach than a decision maker. So then Gary Condis and I put this together into a model. In the center are the core values, are the skills, are the mindset, the way of thinking that we're trying to teach leaders. And the first step for a leader is to develop themselves, to learn this mindset through practice, through trial and error, getting feedback from somebody, maybe from many people, but at the very least, maybe your boss should be giving you useful feedback so you can improve yourself. So we call that committing to self-development, committing to learning. And if you think you're already a great leader and you know how to lead, you have all the subroutines built in, all the habits, and you say, leave me alone, I know how to lead, I've always gotten results that I wanted, then you can't be taught. So the enemy of learning something new is a feeling of certainty that you already know. So when you practice this scientific thinking, and Toyota has their own problem-solving method, and all their leaders go through it multiple times with a coach. You typically work on a big problem that takes months to solve. For a senior leader, it would take 8 months. For somebody in middle management, it would take 4 months to achieve this challenge. And you're being coached in achieving this challenge. And we've done that a few times. Then you're in a position to become a teacher and start to teach other people. And the second step, you are coaching and developing others. And when you're up here, and if you've developed people on the front line who are doing the work, then you are supporting their Kaizen, their improvement. And that's the next stage. And then the final stage is to align all of these people working on improvement toward a common goal for the business. And the ability to do that is as strong as the leadership ability of every person in the chain of leadership. Their ability to do Kaizen, to think scientifically, to meet the challenges will make the challenges real and useful. But setting a bunch of objectives that people can't achieve doesn't do you much good. So we talked about this as kind of an evolution, starting with self-development leaders, moving to leaders becoming coaches, and then to the leaders of actual frontline work groups, teaching their work groups, and then doing Kaizen on daily operations every day. And then at that point, aligning these people through this top-down planning process. So let me talk about the first step, the kata for self-development. And again, what Mike Rother was trying to do is to develop a way of teaching that involves practice with a coach. And just like you would have a teacher for guitar, or you'd have a teacher for dancing, and there would be props, like dance this way, dance, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, and do 1, 2, 3, 4 over and over again until it becomes a habit, until it becomes comfortable. Then we'll teach you the next kata and the next kata. So what are the kata for scientific thinking? And the starting point is that we need a good model of scientific thinking. We have to ask, what would it look like if you were doing a good job? And for that, he developed a model. This is Mike Rother, a former student of mine who went off on his own and developed these great ideas. He developed this model he calls the improvement kata. This is a fairly simple scientific model that we then will ask you to learn step by step. And the first step is identifying a good challenge for your department, for your business, whatever level you're at. What's a good challenge? And a challenge should be some time out. 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, not 2 weeks. So if you could achieve something that would really make a difference in your business in the next 6 months, the next year, what would it be? And with the coach, you agree on a good challenge statement, how you're going to measure that challenge statement, and now you have a direction. Then the second part of the process is once you have your direction, what is the current state? Where am I now? And again, that goes back to the Tai Chi Ono circle. Stand in the circle and observe. Talk to people, collect data, understand the current process, and there's kata for doing that. There's some recommended things to measure and ways of seeing to practice, understanding the current condition. So now you understand where you want to be, you understand where you are. How do you get from where you are to where you want to be? And if the challenge is a good challenge, that is, you don't know, then what you need to do is to take the first step. But the first step toward the challenge, like my challenge is to do what I'm used to doing in 2 weeks, in 3 days. I have no idea where to start because the challenge seems so big and so overwhelming. So we might say, let's come up with a first target of reducing this time by a half a day, by 4 hours. And that gives you a smaller target. And even in sports, we know that setting shorter targets for an athlete are much more motivating, much more effective than a huge target that seems overwhelming. So we're breaking down the challenge into pieces. What is our first piece? What do we want to achieve first? By when? And for the target condition, we're usually suggesting 2 weeks to a month. So I want to be here in a year. Where do I want to be in the next 2 weeks? Now by having the next 2 weeks, I'm going to have a measuring point coming up pretty soon, so I have to start working on it now. If I have a challenge for a year out, I might wait for 11 months to get started. And when I am approaching this challenge, these target conditions, these short-term goals, what I want you to do as a coach is I don't want you to agonize over the perfect solution. I want you to come up with one good idea and test it. Test it fast and test it cheaply so you can learn quickly. Some say fail fast. It's better to fail fast than to agonize to get the perfect solution and maybe fail after a long period of time. Failing is fine as long as you're learning something. Succeeding is certainly better. But if you succeed on every one of your experiments, then you must already know the solution. So I expect you as a coach to fail sometimes if this is a good challenge for you. And from each of these experiments, I'm going to ask you, what do you think is going to happen when you make this change? What's your prediction, your hypothesis? Then when you run the experiment, I'm going to ask you to check how you did compared to your hypothesis. And then I'm going to ask you, what did you learn from this? And what are you going to test next? What experiment are you going to test next? So what we're doing is iterative learning, small PDCA cycles. And you get very quick feedback. And for humans, it's very motivating to try something, learn something, and then want to succeed and reach the goal and try something more. And what we see is people get real into it. We've been in situations where a company's trying to, some lean folks are trying to teach problem solving, and they say, we're doing all the problem solving, we're doing all the thinking. We can't get the actual people doing the work to think. And they don't want to try anything, they're afraid of failing on an experiment. And then they use this kata method, and they say, now we've got another problem. Nobody wants to do their work because they want to run the next experiment. We can't stop them from experimenting. They're so into it. So this is naturally very motivating. It's like playing a video game and trying to win. Okay, so let's say you've gone through this with a coach, and like I said, in Toyota, to teach this way of thinking, to do a project would typically take somewhere between 4 months and 8 months. So you've gone through this 4-month cycle. You're a senior leader. And now I'm going to say you have to learn how to be a coach and teach the people who work for you. And the other thing my brother came up with was what he calls a storyboard, a big board. It could be a whiteboard. And you document each of the steps of this improvement process. So the first step is to pick a process you want to improve and identify your challenge statement and write them on the board. Then you need to understand the current condition, and you use a part of this board for documenting the current condition. Then you set your target condition and you define it and you document what you want to achieve in the first, say, 2 weeks, and then the next 2 weeks, the next 2 weeks. And then you use the experimenting record to document each experiment one line at a time. And every day I am meeting with you as a coach because I want this to be continuous improvement, which means do something every day. It could be collect data, it could be run an experiment. Don't take long. It should only take you, say, 10 to 20 minutes a day. And over several months of doing something every day, you'll find amazing things happen. You've accomplished amazing things. Now we're used to setting aside a lot of time. Maybe we set aside all day Friday to work on improvement. Or maybe we do a 3-day workshop. And then every quarter we do a 3-day workshop. So what we're saying is don't do a 3-day workshop. There's certain times when that's useful. But for learning continuous improvement, spend 20 minutes a day. So stretch out that 3 days into a few minutes a day that you do every day. And every day meet with your coach for 5 minutes. The coach is going to ask you questions and check your thinking, check your work, and give you corrective feedback. And there's even a set of questions for coaching. Mike calls them the 5 questions that parallel the method that I talked about. So what is your target condition? What is your current condition? What are you trying now? What experiment are you running? For that experiment, what did you expect to happen? What happened? What did you learn? What's the next experiment you're going to try? Again, the brain likes repetition. We're trying to build a habit of improvement. We're trying to build a habit of scientific thinking. So, what this ends up looking like is not this. So think about climbing the mountain, and the manager is a better mountain climber than you, and is trying to teach you mountain climbing, and he's pulling you along and saying, do it this way. Look here, this rock is loose. I don't want to try to put a spike in this rock because we'll all fall down. Watch and learn. And he's demonstrating as you climb the mountain. But in reality, the learner is probably not learning very much. It's very difficult for our brains to retain a lot of information. So if I go all the way up the mountain and then the manager says, okay, now you try climbing the mountain, I'm going to probably kill myself and fail. What effective coaching really looks like is that the student is in front and the student is taking steps up the mountain. And the manager is saying, wait a second, watch out, that rock might be loose. You should test it first. And in a sense, the manager is putting his life in the hands of the student. So if you're trying to develop people, you as a manager have to be willing to put your life in the hands of your subordinates. Trust them. Trust that if they follow a good process, and if you're coaching them, and what Toyota will talk about, like on a train or like in a highway, is having guardrails. You as a manager want to put up guardrails and not let the student fall off the cliff or drive off the cliff. So we want them to be safe, in other words, but if they try something and fail, it's okay, let them fail. And then discuss what they learned from that. So the manager becomes somebody who agrees on the challenge with you as a learner, and then you're following this improvement method, and mostly the manager is asking you questions, not giving you answers. So, some key takeaways from this. One, I defined lean as struggling to improve the value you add to your customers. So continuous improvement means people struggling together to get better every day at serving the customer. You have to understand what your customer wants. You have to understand your process, where there's weaknesses in your process that are preventing you from better serving the customer and overcoming those weaknesses. And scientific thinking is what underlies continuous improvement. Getting the facts, understanding the reality of what's going on, and then trying solutions, and then checking what's really happening when I make this change. Is it really working the way I think it should work? And people are not naturally good at this. And it's because of the way our brains are wired, not because people are stupid or lazy. So in order to overcome our natural tendencies, we need to practice, make this a habit, and it requires something that you practice and a coach. So in Toyota, they don't use this language of kata, but what they say is that I can't really teach you unless you're doing something, unless you're working on improving something. And then as you work on improving it, I could watch you, I could give you corrective feedback, I could coach you. Okay, so I have time for a couple questions.
Thank you, Jeffrey. It's me again. Thank you very much. And before the break, I would like to ask you to answer some questions, because on our site in Rязань, we have people who ask you questions, and unfortunately we don't have too much time, but 2 questions will be enough for this part. First one, what advice would you like to give to modern manufacturers who wants to be in trend of modern tendencies of production and technologies?
So I talked about continuous improvement. I talked about trying to reach a challenging goal that you can't do today. So when Toyota implements new technology, they're always modernizing and updating their factories. For example, about every 5 years they introduce a brand new car model in a factory, and they usually introduce new equipment as part of that changeover. When they introduce a new technology, they may know the technology works in a factory in Japan, but they don't know exactly how it's going to work in this factory, say in Russia. There's a Toyota plant in Russia. They're bringing this set of equipment here, and there may be certain conditions in this plant that are different from in Japan. And also, you have the problem that you're trying to implement the equipment, and in Toyota's case, they're still making cars while they introduce new equipment. So the challenge for the plant becomes introducing the new equipment while you're making cars at full production rate by this date. Now the plant is challenged. What they want the plant then to do is to use this scientific thinking process. So if you're a plant manager, you're going to first pick one process and introduce maybe one machine. And you'll plan in advance how you're going to introduce the machine, how you're going to train the person to operate the machine or maintain the machine, set up some assistance in the form of, say, visuals that show the standard work for maintaining the machine and teaching them to use the standard work. And then you're going to try it. And you will figure out how long it takes, and maybe you confused the person with your explanations. So when you introduce the next machine, you're going to do it better and faster. When you introduce the third machine, it's going to be even better. And then eventually it'll be fairly fast. So you're going to go slow up front, learning how to introduce the new equipment, how to make it work, how to maintain it, and then you're going to go faster as you've learned. So more, the Toyota calls it front-end loading. And the front-end loading part, there's a lot of experimenting and there's a lot of PDCA. So one of the mistakes I see manufacturers making is they want to modernize, and we are currently here without this modern equipment. And we want to be there with all this modern equipment working at a high level of performance without breaking down. And we throw all the equipment on the floor, and then we discover it doesn't work and it breaks down, and we actually slow production down. That's not a good scientific way of modernizing or introducing new technology.
Thank you very much. One more, if you don't mind. Okay. There are different industrial spheres. Is there any difference in the methods of using lean, for example, between agriculture and construction?
Yeah, there's actually a good book in America called The Lean Farm, and it was written by this farmer who was very interested in the environment and recycling and sustainability, and he didn't own a lot of land, so he needed to get a really good yield from every square meter of the space he had for growing things. So he did a lot of study to learn some of the latest farming methods, and then he began to experiment with lean methods and think about the best way to water, the best way to fertilize naturally, how to spread the fertilizer, what pattern to use to spread the fertilizer. And he ended up with a lean farm that has a yield of product 10 times the average for similar farms. And then he wrote a book about that. So his approach to and he used all the concepts of lean. He used visual management. With visual management, you're planning the system and you're collecting data on your performance indicators, and you're checking how you're doing compared to your target, and you have standard work for how you're going to do a task. In an assembly line of Toyota, it's 1 minute, 1 minute, 1 minute. Every 1 minute, do the test this way. In a farm, you don't always have 1 minute jobs. It might be a full day job. So you have to figure out what standard work meant for the farm. So he took the concepts of lean and he thought very systematically like a scientist, and he experimented, and he ended up with all the concepts of just-in-time and building in quality at every step and standard work and visual management. All the concepts were there, but they fit the farming environment. And so the message there was that he did not try to copy the solutions of Toyota. He used the principles, and he did a lot of thinking and a lot of experimenting, and he found a solution that worked for his problem in farming.
Thank you very much. See you during the next part. Okay? Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to take a half an hour break. Thank you.
Итак, друзья, спасибо, Джефри, за первую часть лекции. У нас 15-минутный перерыв, и через 15 минут мы ждем всех на своих местах для продолжения нашей лекции. Если кто-то хочет попить воды, слева и справа волонтеров можно взять по бутылочке